What is the most important thing in design? Meeting the user's goals if you're a good designer, or the business's goals if you're an evil designer and chose to play for the corporates in Cyberpunk 2077. But what exactly should you do to help the user achieve their goal? Probably guide them through the interface and the information. How? What tools do we have for that? Let's imagine we have information about what, where, when, and what to do, but it's inconvenient. And how do we apply the magic of design to help the user? Here, I claim that there's one rule that makes any design convenient and good. One rule that is the main tool for designers of any level. But for reasons unknown to me, no one is shouting from every corner that this is the main rule and that it changes everything. Not even all design programs emphasize it, which is wild. But fear not, I'm here to save you. It's literally the main rule of design. Knowing it alone can improve any design. And it's the key tool for managing user attention. And managing attention is one of the main tasks of a designer, as we've just established. So first of all, let's figure out what to do with this information. How do we guide the user through it? And to understand what to fix, we need to understand what's wrong. Can you look at this text and say what you, as a consumer of this information, don't like? I look at this blog and find it hard to understand what, where, and when. What is being asked of me? What do I need to do? What might I gain? I realize that I have to read the entire text and it looks long. I see numbers and symbols, so it seems complicated. I understand that I'll have to spend mental resources to read, analyze, and structure it in my head. This discourages me. I don't yet understand what value I could gain from it or why I should spend my resources analyzing it. There's a high chance that as a user, I will never find out what its value is, and I'll find it too hard to proceed. How can we convince the user that it's not difficult? We need to convince them that they don't need to analyze anything. We must show the main information quickly and also provide the additional information. How do we do that? We need to structure everything for the user. Take the name Oxford Designer Meetup, Creative Future, and place it in a separate line. Now we've quickly separated it from everything else and clarified what it's all about. It's at the top and stands alone. Now it's easy to read because it's a short, simple to analyze piece of information. Next, we add another slightly more complex but still easy to understand piece of information. Join us for a day of design insights and workshops on UX, graphic design, and AI tools. This complements and explains things even better. Now I understand everything. Next, based on the symbols, I quickly see that it's about the address and date without even having to read closely. And it's easy to read because it stands alone. I don't need to think about it for now. Then I see that to attend, I simply need to send an email by October 20th. I've probably missed the deadline already. We've structured everything for the user. Now all they need to do is scan it with their eyes quickly, much faster than they would have with the previous version, and easily understand what's going on. We used one action, moving elements around, thus creating negative space or empty space. And we did all this by applying just one rule, the principle of proximity, which sounds simple but is crucial to remember and repeat to yourself. Objects that are placed close together are perceived as related. The farther apart objects are, the less related they seem. If we're talking about even more basic principles, we create contrasts. And the designer's only tool for managing user attention, guiding them through information, is contrast. The most fundamental contrast is the one between presence and absence, between information and emptiness, between text and negative space. And I assure you, this is the most important contrast in design. Everything else is secondary. Color contrast, size contrast, font contrast, they're all secondary. The main thing is the principle of proximity, which creates a contrast between negative space and positive space. Yes, we can greatly improve readability by also adding size contrast and a little bit of color contrast. Readability improves dramatically. But fundamentally, we can already improve readability significantly by just working with negative space and contrast. Moreover, if we add the color, size, and font contrasts but don't create spacing contrast, we'll end up with bad design that doesn't fulfill its function. But if we only create spacing contrast, we'll get a design that may not be pretty or stylish but will still serve its purpose. Everything else is also important to make a design good in the end. but this is the foundation to make the design functional at all. You can have a beautiful design with pleasing visuals that simply doesn't work because it lacks basic design principles. For example, we might open a random case on Behance and immediately see how this visual, which may even be trendy, whether or not it's to your taste, which I'll note here because it's not to mine, has no issue with style. But we instantly notice that the first blocks don't have any spacing contrast. It's just one block, slightly set apart, followed by 3 equally spaced blocks. And then there's no structure. We see that there's no contrast here. As a result, there's a lot of information, but it doesn't look structured. It looks like a flat expanse where the user is forced to structure it in their head. This means we're making the user do the design work in their mind so they can then process the information. And this is a very common scenario. Designers learn to create trendy, flashy visuals, sometimes even very high-quality visuals with great images, especially those who come from more creative fields. At first glance, the image might look impressive and interesting, but when we try to understand how it works, it turns out it doesn't work. Because the trendy visual isn't built on the foundation needed to structure information and interface through contrast and the principle of proximity. The simplest example, let's look at a profile card. We can see that there's no contrast at all here. The cards are close together, there's no spacing inside the card. We often hear feedback from experienced designers saying you need to add some air, but rarely is it explained what that means and why it's necessary. Air is contrast. We need the title and text within a block to be perceived as connected, and the block itself should be separate from others because it forms a kind of boundary. We need the structure to be easily seen by the user so they can focus on the text inside. For this to work, we need contrast. The text inside the block needs to be more closely connected than the space between the text and the block's boundary. This is the contrast of spacing. The inner spacing must be smaller than the outer spacing, and then we'll get a structured layout. At first glance, it might seem like an ugly layout, but by simply nudging things around a little, we can follow this rule. To visually connect elements through spacing that need to be linked and to separate those that should be perceived as distinct. Suddenly, we have a good design that's easy to read and well structured. Let's anchor this with one more example. Here's a slide with the slide title, article image, and a small text. What's wrong with the margins in this picture? Look for 5 seconds and think. Visually, the distance from the article title is the same to both the slide title and the picture. Meaning, on a conceptual level, it's equally simple to wrongly connect it with the slide title as it is correctly with the article. And because of this, it feels like there's no integrity in the block with the article information. Let's not fix it yet, but rather exacerbate the situation by adding a second article. Now the problem is even more evident. The title of the second article is noticeably closer to the first article than to its picture. The composition has completely fallen apart. And I want to emphasize that the problem is not just in understanding the boundaries between the articles, but also in the lack of integrity within the blocks with the article information. That is, the design turns out to be loose and slightly falling apart into pieces, not coming together into cohesive blocks. And see how everything changes when we, without trying to beautifully and super competently relay out the entire page, just move the titles closer to their pictures. And on one hand, this is a simple rule that is easy to remember. On the other hand, my 20 years of experience working with other designers suggests that it takes experience and design literacy to notice the violation of this rule. And often juniors, and sometimes even mid-level designers, miss it. My advice, if you are not familiar with this rule or do not have the habit of checking every layout, practice a bit. Open Google Maps and look at the websites of the nearest businesses. I'm sure they are full of these rule violations. Just take a screenshot and roughly move the elements in Photoshop, bringing the layouts in line with the rule. And you will be amazed at how much it changes everything. And this rule is so basic for design that it is the only one I teach my designers and students to apply even before the design stage, at the wireframe stage. Which says a lot because in general, applying design rules to wireframes is strictly prohibited, because it can spoil and break the whole process. Why? Watch the video about the aesthetics of wireframes, one of the most important videos on our channel.